So this is the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast. I'm Andrew Savage.
I'm Nancy Richards.
And today we have a really special guest, Manuel Torres of the anti-ICE movement in Port Richmond High School and here on Staten Island. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So, Manny, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, the organizations that you're active with in Port Richmond and outside of Port Richmond High School, and a little bit about how this all got started?
Right. So I am a graduate senior from Portsmouth High School who is 17 years old, and I basically commanded the movement Raiders Against ICE, which is basically our little club that basically runs protests around Portsmouth High School alongside with other high schools. For example, Wagner High School, Curtis High School, and soon to be McKee High School as well.
Excellent. And so what prompted you to get involved in the anti-ICE movement? We talked a little bit before we started recording that oftentimes the perception is on Staten Island that there's not much opposition to what ICE is doing or to the aggression that we've seen by the administration towards migrants and American citizens. So what got you started in all this?
Right. So, like I said, basically, as a young child, I've always been discriminated for my race, my color, my nationality, alongside with my language. And like I mentioned to you guys, I was always a witness to this. For example, my father being arrested, my father being pulled over by racist officers who basically decided to intimidate him, trample him, until they saw the backside of his car and saw me, knowing that if I witnessed this, it would have caused an entire fiasco. And I'm grateful for being there because, of course, if I wasn't in the backside of the car, he would have had a whole different story, or he wouldn't be with me at this day. And not to mention, alongside within the growing discrimination here in Staten Island, uh, it's become more and more difficult. For example, my father also being arrested by ICE when I was a freshman. And of course, it hurt me because this was during the time of my regents. And basically, I didn't have a voice back then. I was very introverted rather than extroverted now that I am. And of course, it shocks many students, teachers, parents, how I basically decided to speak out about this. Because, of course, we all have the same opinion, but no one's willing to break the ice. And that's where I came in.
Wow,
Basically,
unintended, yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
But basically, the protest itself, it all happened back in Wagner High School when Wagner hosted its Culture Day. And of course, Wagner has a very big scandal alongside with its own controversy within an administration, where basically the principal, the APs, basically warned the students not to present a poster that said "Ice Out." And of course, the students didn't listen, and they decided to have that sign out. Unfortunately, the students weren't treated with respect as they were given. Many teachers basically heckled, many teachers basically looked at them pretending to be scared, but of course, they wanted to intimidate the students. And the only student that was actually in trouble was the student who held up the sign, who was suspended. Of course, the community here in Staten
Do you,
Island,
do you know what his suspension was? His charge was? Was it insubordination?
Yeah,
What did
what's the
they?
cause? Yeah.
so basically, I have no clue. But of
Okay.
course, basically, well, of course, students had said that she had the right to say whatever she wanted under the First Amendment. But the school board wasn't having it, and she was suspended.
Okay. And
So
so,
that so that ignited the protest at Susan Wagner, and
That
you
ignited.
and you saw that, and then you kind of began something at Port Richmond. Is that how
Yes,
it?
ma'am.
Okay, all right. So
Because
so that got you out of your shell, seeing.
so that pissed
right,
so that pissed you off. You got angry over that, and you were like,
absolutely, yeah,
so you were like, let's start something near Port
right.
Richmond. I
Be-
imagine though at Port Richmond, it's probably, it would probably be that kind of thing, saying out ice out and having that sort of movement. I think that would maybe be more well received there because the neighborhood is very much immigrant rich and has a really strong connection to that group.
right, of course. So, like I said, once I saw whatever happening in Wagner, I basically spoke to most of my friends who also attend Wagner, alongside knowing the owner of the Wagner Against Ice account, basically saying how I was going to start this because back in November, one of our former alumni, Sarah, was also detained by ICE in New
Yeah,
Jersey, and it was also sent to the same facility that's happening in Newark,
at Delaney Hall.
the Delaney Hall. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do this back in November, but of course, within the pressure that was happening, the current basically how ICE was also around our neighborhoods, we thought it would be best not to do so. Not because we didn't want it to show support, but because of the safety of our students. But of
Right.
but of course, as ICE's appearance had become lower and lower, I basically spoke with my friends. I told them I'm going to do a protest. They were in full support, but of course, it wasn't going to have, a very happy start. Of course, when I created the account, I created the posters, some students actually laughed about it. And of course, it had to be,
What were they laughing at? Like, what was the,
they were saying how it was a useless protest, many of saying that no one was going to show up. They were saying that it was only to skip class.
why
And
bother?
why bother it? Yeah. And of course, most of them were also Republicans themselves, which is confusing considering the fact how you see their race, but yet you see their political view.
So students of color were Republican.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yeah,
You had
people who are
students who
Republican.
were
Yeah.
you had students who were Middle Eastern, you had students that were Hispanic, and they were voting red.
Well,
Well, that happens. Well, you guys aren't technically old enough to vote yet, but I assume you mean if they were,
The
uh,
ideology, yes.
yeah, they
they would
would.
belong to a
Yeah,
Republican
yeah.
club or a Democrat club. Um,
Right,
well, also too, I find, we do live in a like our podcast is left in the forgotten borough where people tend to think that Staten Island is just conservative, and there is a very big conservative faction, and of course that
right,
stems into parents, the children sometimes originally kind of see what their parents say, and then they kind of absorb, and then eventually they make up their own decisions on how they see the world. But there is a conservative faction, here on Staten Island, and it's not just, whites who are conservative. There is, people of color that are also conservative. But when you say when the remarks that some of the kids were making, when the protests were happening and it was in the newspapers, a lot of the comments from the adults were the same things you just said. So apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Uh,
right.
yeah, so that's interesting.
So there's
Yeah,
so there was I would say if I'm understanding you correctly, there was a mixture of apathy to downright hostility.
right, yes.
Okay. And how did you handle that? How did you persist through that?
I basically listened, but of course I didn't want to say anything because at the time no one knew who was running the account, no one knew who was the organizer at the time. And of course I had to basically endure those comments because if I basically spoke out, many people were gonna either, target me, they were either gonna bully me, or even, God knows what would happen. Because of course, my priority was basically the protest. And I would admit, I saw like a lot of students who didn't say anything back about the protest in a positive way, where it basically got to me saying, "Is this really worth it?" But then, of course, I saw the comments in the social media platform where they were saying they're ready, they're willing to go. And of course, we had around 1,000 followers in the account where it
Oh,
got my where it got my morale up. And the day of the protest, I remembered I packed all my things. I basically told my mom what was happening because she didn't even know at the time. And then she heard about it 5 minutes before I left for high school. And then I told her I was running it, and she was astounded because, of course, throughout my high school career, I was mostly in JROTC, doing military things. I was I was always a leader, but of course, I was never within this type of uh,
activism.
activism. Yeah,
Well, and you mentioned earlier that a family member of yours was detained by ICE a few years ago. You said 2023, I believe. And so that was under the Biden administration. And so how was that ultimately, if you can talk about it, how was that ultimately resolved? Because under the Trump administration, we're seeing, you know, people don't have access to legal counsel. Families, oftentimes, we were talking about Sarah earlier, her
Right.
family, she was moving from place to place for a very short amount of time. She was in like 10 different places. And
Yeah.
so, like, how did your family get through that? And what were some of the ways that you viewed your experience under ICE under the Biden administration versus what's now happening under the Trump administration?
Right, of course. I mean, I would say when my dad was arrested by ICE back in 2023, I would consider it more humane because, of course, they weren't wearing masks. They presented themselves as ICE. They had a warrant for his arrest and were even basically following every single rules that ICE should follow because they presented themselves, they showed their badges, their vest said ICE, rather than basically hiding their faces, putting on federal police patches, and not showing warrants of arrest. And now that I think about it, I was upset, but now that I imagine it happening now, I would have been furious because, of course, at this time, during 2023, it was more within regulations rather than happening right now, where basically ICE's basically donkey kicking doors, getting someone that they don't even know the is the arresting perp, and basically just putting them in a car, not giving them any rights, not giving them the right to their lawyer. Because when I got back from my region, my mom was able to contact him, knowing where he was. He was around downtown Manhattan,
Yeah.
and then we were basically able to receive a lawyer, and then he got out 2 days later, which was a miracle.
So he had his due process,
He had his due process, ma'am.
and after the due process, they're like, "All right, you're good to go."
Yes,
Uh,
ma'am.
does your dad, does your family worry about like the current administration? You know,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, have steps been taken, like kind of what to do and, um, you know, I took ICE training in regards to kind of like how to warn people, like I'm kind of I'm not in a position to be detained, so it's kind of like
Right.
what can I do? And it's just kind of like warning people and my neighbors, giving certain facts of what, like you said, you like presenting a warrant, like not
Right.
opening the door, like no, they don't have a right to, to open the door. Like um those are things that are not happening at all under this current administration. And that happened under the Biden administration. So, has your family taken those precautions? Um, because they don't play fair now.
Right. So my mom, of course, she understands how ICE is playing now. She, of course, knows the most of the rules. For example, don't open the door unless a warrant's presented, making sure that making sure that they're present rather than hiding their faces or showing off their patches. And of course, like I mean, the person that's most vulnerable in our family, of course, is my dad, because my mom has permanent residency due to her case that happened back in Mexico, while my dad is still in the due process with him getting his permanent residency. So of course, I mean, I try to tag along with him as the best of my ability because of course I am the person who was born here in American soil and of course has an understanding. And of course, this time my dad's becoming more and more vulnerable throughout the times
Yeah.
because he is getting older where his visibility is decreasing, his understanding is lower. And of and I don't know if you guys remember this, a a Hispanic male was also arrested in Porchman Avenue, close to Richmond Terrace, early in the morning, and his son was also a National Guard.
And that was during the current administration.
That happened during the current administration, I believe around February or December.
Well, I remember ICE being around in the winter in Port Richmond, and they did
Right.
pick up. I don't know specifically that story.
Right, because the story that I'm telling you is a friend of my father's. And of course, I know him too because her daughter also was in JROTC with me at the time. And his son decided to join the National Guard. And the fact how I heard how he was arrested because he has no prior criminal record and alongside was also physically blind, ICE was basically able to arrest him easily. And that kind of scared me because my dad's also losing his sight. And not to mention, he is not a permanent residency. He doesn't have a green card or a US citizen, which is increasing more and more my fear because God knows what would happen.
Right, like where, where would they put him? So he's vulnerable in essence of in regards to um, his status. Um,
Right.
And
he
even though his case was adjudicated, though,
Of
already.
course. Yeah.
so in that case, that place he has a safety net, so which is good. But still, but in this administration, as you can see, people are being picked up and detained for, without any due process, regardless of like people who are showing up for their court appearances, doing, what it is they need to be doing in order for their status. I have a friend who has uh, been here and she's married to an American citizen, and we were going to go travel together. She won't leave the country. Like she's just, and she has she's a resident, permanent resident, and she's just even nervous about, until she actually gets her citizenship. So people are treading very lightly, um,
Right.
in,
Yeah, and
in regards to that
yeah,
because they
and
don't play fair.
absolutely not. And I was not one of those people who was saying abolish ICE for a long time. I'm kind of a Johnny come lately to that. I was sort of like, well, we need to have some mechanism for enforcement. But now I've changed my position, just given what ICE has done over the past year and a half or so, just the no due process, the random killings of American citizens, the just the abject cruelty and horror that they've imposed on American cities and the populations of American cities. But I want to get back to the protest itself. And
Right.
so the protest itself, so you were the organizer of the social media account at Port Richmond, which we'll include on our show notes for people to follow. But tell us a little bit about, what went into the protests. Were you just planning a march? Was there going to be speakers? What was the statement you were trying to make, and how was it received by the community? You mentioned earlier when you talked about Wagner, the fact that faculty members, or at least certain faculty members, were heckling the folks who put out that banner.
Right.
How were your efforts received?
So, like I said, basically me and my friends huddled up. We basically spoke about having a protest, and everyone was in agreement, basically allowing the protest to happen. We had posters happening around the social media platform. People were also basically reposting it, sending it to multiple people. But like I said, there was a bit of a drawback within it, especially with students and alongside with teachers as well, basically calling it a bit of a hopeless protest. But of course, the show out, the show out was the biggest impression to me, in my opinion, because
Called the
we
show
had,
out.
yeah, the show out. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, but of course, we had around 200 students that basically left Portsmouth High School and went across the street to Elm Park, where was the rally point.
Okay.
And we didn't have any speakers because at the time it was basically just walk out of high school and then rally. That was basically it. But I decided to.
Did you have a thing of events, like we're going to stand in the park for a certain amount of time? Did you need to get a permit? Did Were you able to disperse easily? Blah blah blah. Did you do it after school or during school?
This
Safe.
was during. All right, this was during seventh period, which is around 1:33 of the afternoon.
Mhm.
There was no permit required for Elm Park because I don't know if this is either a New York City park issue or a private park issue, but I couldn't find any type of permit to have it in Elm Park. But of course, there was like no agents, no park rangers within the range. So then I basically considered it safe. And what was the other question?
Did you have like a scheduled time, like how long you would be there? Like, was it easy to disperse? Like, was there any issues? Like that's part of organizing,
Right, of
like,
course. So basically, we were going to have it from 1:33 until the end of the school day, which is 2:30. Of course, there was a bit of an issue within the students, of course, with themselves. For example, many were starting to bang New York City trash cans, which the police wasn't happy about. But of course, I was able to speak with the commanding officer at the time and told him how the rally point was in Elm Park. So they were also able to help me maneuver the students from the entrance of the school at St. Joseph Avenue to Elm Park at Inna Street as well.
okay. So it sounds like it went well. Like, what do you feel was the best takeaway from the rally,
The
the
best
show out?
takeaway, the best takeaway was, of course, the show out, where we had 200 students. Many of them were able to bring their national jerseys. Many were able to have uh, cardboard posters or even like their notebooks where they just wrote "Ice Out." But of course, in my opinion, that really didn't matter because we had 200 students out of 1,000 students, which is a quarter of the school population. So if we were able to have that amount of students, I think it was a very good show out. Not to mention, many students were also curious because as I walked into the school building to enter for my first period, I saw the Auntie Anne cart, and then that's where I knew something good was going to happen because the fact how they were also at the last protest at Wagner,
Hmm.
that means that we were going to have a lot of attraction. And as I stepped out after six periods, which is my final period, I saw the administration, I saw the deans, of course, NYPD Community Affairs, and I decided to speak with my principal, Mr. Greenfield. And of course, he can't have an opinion on this, but he said that students were allowed to do what they wanted to do as the First Amendment. Where I knew that I wasn't going to get in trouble either way, but it was nice to hear that from my principal that he, of course, was going to let this happen.
Well, he was just as supportive as he could be, I guess, in he's got a
Yeah.
responsibility for safety, but you also had it across the street at Elm Park. So
Right,
it's not in his jurisdiction, as I understand, right? Because it's not Port Richmond High School.
right,
So that's why where the NYPD comes in. And they seem to have supported you as well because
of
they
course.
allowed you, right? So
Yeah,
so
like
it sounds like it was a successful show out.
right. I mean, I met myself with the commanding officer who was questioning me, saying who was the organizer, and of course, I didn't want to get in trouble at the time. So then I just said, I don't know, I'm just here for the party. And of course, we met afterwards, and then he didn't he wasn't bothered, but he tried to say it as in a funny way, saying, "I thought you said you weren't the organizer." And then I said, "He caught me." And of course, we had a conversation. He laughed about it, and in a positive way. And then I gave him my contact, saying, if there was another protest, he can always contact me because I might have information. And then right before I left him, he said, "Hey, you do know despite you doing this, I still have a purpose on protecting you." And of course, most of them were also Hispanic themselves. So then we were also able to conversate in Spanish and alongside getting a handshake from him too, which was impressive to me because, of course, what kind of protest organizer can say they got a handshake from a commanding officer who was at their protest? And I knew that was a very good thing because if the officer shook my hand, that means I was 100% positive at this point.
Well,
And you mentioned, I'm sorry, Nancy, I'll let you go. I
oh
just
no, I was going to just comment off of what he said. The objective of the NYPD is safety. So, their goal is the fact that they want the students to, have a safe, a safe protest. They don't, they, when things get messy is when, there is chaos. That's why it's good it's good to work with them so they know there's parameters. And then, where things kind of go differently, like, is when you disagree on the terms of what you want to do, and that's when people might, like if you look at in regards to Delaney Hall, remember how they set up a First Amendment
The First
area?
Amendment pen, they called it.
And yeah. And, a lot of people are like, what is that? That's ridiculous. And I need a First Amendment pen. I remember I organized a protest up at Lehman College, and they put us in a pen, like, and they, and we weren't happy with that. And so, so these are things where you could have conflict, but then there are times when you don't, and you work with, the NYPD, you know, especially when you can. So
Right.
it's good to have them, it's a good partnership when it works well.
Of course.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you, so you had this really great turnout. You had 200 students show up. It was a pretty peaceful day. I think the message was heard. There was a story in the Advance, which they covered. How did that change? Because you mentioned earlier the initial skepticism, and you mentioned the initial hostility that this all
Right.
faced within certain parts of the school community. How did that change? Did the turnout change anybody's mind, or did you see that people maybe were more engaged now to see that perhaps there were other people who were out there too?
So I'm also gonna use this pun one more time. Like I said, I broke the ice. So this also
Mhm.
sparked the protest that happened at Curtis High School, alongside within another protest that's happening at McKee High School sooner or later. And of course, a lot of students had a lot of great ideas. They had a lot of great thoughts about this. And alongside with the Portsmouth community, of course, most of the tias were talking about it. Most of the tias were basically trying to find out more about it. And of course, it gave more my community here in Portsmouth High School and Portsmouth neighborhood itself more attention because, of course, within the protests, within Portsmouth basically kicking out ICE out of the avenue, it basically gave them more awareness and more attention within basically saying we're bigger than ICE if it comes here. And we're not wrong
And
because
you're aware and you're willing to speak up. And, it's the same thing like with, when I'm thinking about like all the ice training that a lot of people are having throughout the city and on Staten Island, where, when ice is coming to certain neighborhoods, because I remember one of the things that we were focusing on was we were afraid that people were going to get pulled on, food lines and people waiting, to get food pantry lines.
right,
And, so warning people like when we saw, it's organization. And so it's great to see that the student movement is, especially in Port Richmond, because this is one of the towns that's being hit, pretty hard
the
because,
most, yeah,
yeah. So ICE, knows you're organized. And so that
right,
kind of, hopefully suspends what they're doing.
right. And not to mention the fact how is Port Richmond alongside with other neighborhoods because Port Richmond High School has other students within other different neighborhoods as well. For example, some are Willowbrooks, West Brighton, and Western Leeds, which is the most impressive one out of everything. And we have students that aren't even Hispanic or even immigrants themselves, but of course, we were able to gain their support. For example, we had students with like white last names, for example, Smith, Roscoe, Falcone, alongside with African American students as well, which is the biggest thing that I wanted because sure, it's important for us Hispanics or immigrants, but the fact how we were able to get kids who aren't immigrants or immigrant generation, that's the thing I wanted because, of course, they have an understanding of this. They have seen the importance of this to us immigrants because, of course, this is like a poster said, this isn't about politics anymore. It's about humanity at this point.
Right. So with this, what I'm trying to think is, so having them have a sense of, like solidarity with you and recognizing that this is inhumane. So this is good. And I also like the fact that you're communicating with the other schools as well. You kind of started this Staten Island wide um, connection.
Right.
Good,
And
good.
and and those seem to, I don't know the particular numbers there. I did read the articles a while back, but it's been a while. It seemed like those had a pretty good turnout as well. And so, you definitely uh, lit a flame here that I think has spread to certainly the other places. Now, are there any, I know, graduation is just around the corner for you, and you may have to pass the activist baton on to somebody who will still be there next year. But are there any efforts right now? We talked about Delaney Hall earlier. Are there any efforts right now to organize something around, what's happening at Delaney Hall?
So I was also planning on having a mass protest within all the high schools. For example, Wagner, Port Richmond High School, Curtis High School, McKee High School. Within having an ICE protest, although this is going to be a very, like how Nancy said it, a bit of a punch in the gut. But the one place I do want to have this protest happen is at Borough Hall, where basically our local government can see the activism within the youth. The fact how we had around 200 students in Portsmouth High School. We had around, I believe, 250 students at Wagner. And I was also looking up at the report here in Curtis High School, and it says it was around 300 to 400 students that were presented in the Curtis High School protest. So imagine if we have these numbers combined, it would be amazing if I had a
At Borough
protest
Hall.
at Borough Hall, especially within our current local government that's happening with their political views as well.
That would, so are you organizing with the other groups? Have you kind of setting up a plan, getting, because that's a great idea. I mean, in
Right.
regards to you know, coming together with the other schools. And is it in to recognize the conditions at Delaney Hall, the fact that people, elected officials don't really have access to check the conditions? Um, what is the message you want people to uh, know about what's happening at these detention centers?
So, of course, it's about humanity, like I said, not about politics anymore. But of course, our local government is doing very little or have little to no, how do you say it? Little to no interest within this because, of course, they believe that this is pointless, this isn't in their jurisdiction. Why is the purpose on doing this? And not to mention, it hits more when there's young students, especially doing this. Because if it was any other adult, they would just scoff and then just look away. But of course, if it's students doing this during a school day, they're going to get worried because, of course, that's going to decrease numbers for attendance in New York City and not to mention raise more awareness. For example, when was the last protest other than the Portsmouth High School, Wagner, Curtis protest when you guys heard that it was youth led?
Like
Oh,
I think that what I was saying before we went on air with what happened with George Floyd, and that was organized, and that was on the South Shore, and that was a very well organized protest on the South Shore, and that was I think the last time, and then also around Eric Gardner. Um, so this is something new. So that's what
yeah,
I think.
a few years ago, at least. I mean, this
Yeah.
was, what Nancy's talking about was 2020 for the Black Lives Matter, but then for Eric Gardner, that was, a decade or more ago for sure. So definitely, I think it would make a statement. And I think, many of the elected officials, you mentioned Borough Hall, I think Vito Fossella, our borough president, I think is under the misguided interpretation that, Staten Islanders must be all like him and think like him.
Right.
And I think maybe having a youth movement on his doorstep would, move the needle some.
I also
Right.
think in regards to at this rally, it you should show the other people in the silent community how this is impacting um you as youth, in regards to yes, the humanity, but also the fact that, you know, your personal story about taking a Regents, how your dad was detained and how that it impacts the family. Um, in regards to people who are going about their daily lives doing, what we do. We go to work, we take our kids to school, our kids, talking about the personal impacts. I think, Vito Fossella needs to hear these stories, and he needs to know that by turning a blind eye, he's turning a blind eye to the people in his community.
Right. And not to mention, I keep hearing this a lot, and it really is a reality. But of course, the minority at this point in Staten Island are becoming the majority, where basically most of the people that are gonna run this island are gonna either be a minority or someone with immigrant background too, or someone who is second or third generation immigrant.
Well, what's interesting is our congresswoman seems to say that she is the only elected Latina, but meanwhile, her policies seem to be very anti-immigrant. So she needs to be reminded of her Latina constituents
Did
and
you
what they're saying.
you were in DC for something unrelated, and so did you happen to stop by our fearless leader's office?
I met, I was able to witness the office of Nicole Malliotakis,
Did you meet
and
her?
I did not meet her. No, I'd rather not meet her. But
Oh no, well, we would love for her to meet you. We would love for her to meet you because I think, I think especially just your story, your family story, and especially just hearing that
The difference.
an immigration enforcement under the Biden administration and under a more normal government is humane. It preserves people's rights. It is adjudicating cases the way that it ought to be. And so I think that she does need to meet people like you. And in fact, because she's, around people who will, presumably just kind of echo her talking points and sort
right,
of fluff up her pillows.
yeah,
But she needs to be heard she needs to be faced and heard these stories.
right,
Because this is something she can do. You know, you've given evidence that there's two ways that ICE is operated. And, which one does she support? And she's the first person to stand up and say that she's all for law and order and law and order was, when your father was detained, there was law and order, you know,
right,
but there was a process. And the fact that you said that they came to the door, they showed a badge, they weren't masked, the fact that he had a hearing and things like that, your mom was able to contact him, you know, that these are these are just basic things that now are
Well, they're considered like luxuries now.
right.
right.
And Nicole Manelli-Takis needs to stop normalizing what's happening at these detention centers. And so definitely you get an opportunity to meet with her. These are things she needs to hear.
Right.
Face and face like how would she respond to that? Because she seems to hide from things like this.
Of
Well,
course, yeah.
yeah, well, there was also somebody else was speaking with over the weekend, and she was at in DC. She was part of a hunger group dealing with food insecurity, and she went to Congresswoman Meliotakis's office, and of course, she threw some staff on them. Didn't even She was in the office, like out in her outer office, but she put the staff into the conference room to meet with these people, and so she really doesn't meet with people who don't conform to her ideology or to her version of things and to her worldview. And so I think stories like yours are really important. Do you think that this is going to be a movement, this anti-ICE movement? I see, ICE as a problem on a multitude of fronts. One,
Right.
uh, obviously, just how they've just treated migrants inhumanely. They have deprived them of any right or due process, as we've discussed here. But I also see them becoming kind of a paramilitary force for this president. It's not out of the realm of possibility to see ICE agents at polling places in November to try and discourage
Right.
voters. I do see them trying to maybe target critics of this administration. It's his version of Mussolini's brown shirts. Was there any concern among people, among the students in your protest group about that, about the possible infringement on other rights as well, especially around the killing of Renee Good and Alex Preddy in the winter in Minneapolis? Was there any talk of that, or was focused exclusively on the conditions and treatment of migrants?
Uh, so of course we all knew about the death of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, alongside within how Minneapolis have basically turned into a war zone where ICE agents are basically walking and patrolling around the streets, acting like if it was their territory. Of course, we are also within scared because alongside with Minneapolis, New York City is also a very big city and very big within immigration, which is something that we really do fear here in Staten Island alongside with other parts of the city. For example, what happened down in Chinatown, what happened in the Brooklyn hospital when
Mm,
they arrested a Nigerian immigrant.
yeah.
But of course, we are strong here in the city. We are basically doing everything that we can as a community to make sure that ICE doesn't terrorize this borough, this part of the city, this entire city too. Like I mean, the fact how also our mayor has also tried to take action. For example, how the police commissioner down in Brooklyn was also making commentary, and it was moved to a lower grade position. The
I'm getting
fact how
accountable. Yeah.
Right. The fact how many residents down in Chinatown weren't having it with the ICE, a very big place where Chinese immigrants have moved to Manhattan to basically start a new life, but as well preserve their heritage down in Chinatown. That's basically one thing that I love, and alongside within making sure that all of this that we have isn't forgotten, because of course like I tell most people, we're living in a history book right now. We're basically making history. We're writing history and we're witnessing history. Like, I mean, how many of you guys are able to tell your grandchildren that we had to go through tyranny here in New York City and basically had a tyrant in office? Not a lot of people can say that. But of course, we're living through this right now. The fact
Well,
how
yeah, well,
this
places,
movement,
yeah, well, places, there are a lot of places around the world that live with tyranny. I just never thought the United States would be one of them.
right? Like, I mean, throughout the 250 years here, we never had a president who basically didn't listen to the people, but rather listen about his own thoughts and then put them into action. The fact how we are spending a lot for an agency that's acting more as a fascist group. The fact how we're funding, and I like to say this, we're funding a phony military that's only coming for us, the people that they're supposed to serve and protect. Like I mean, there are multiple countries that are doing this, but as well as the fact how, like I said, throughout 250 years, who would have expected the United States would have done this? Because that's what also made us separate from the British. The fact how British troops were sent to Boston and basically collect tax and as well as show terror to colonists here. The fact how it's happening 250 years later with a different administration, with a different type of approach, and more advanced weaponry as well. It's something that I thought would never happen, but of course we're here right now. So
Well, we're being tested. The one thing that, as a U.S. history teacher and a government teacher, is I think we have a pretty solid document called the Constitution that is being tested right now. And it's really up to us as Americans, to hold it accountable, like, I mean, to support it and to hold people accountable who are disobeying the Constitution. And I'm glad to see that you guys, that's what you're doing. You're holding it accountable. Because it only works if we make it work. And if
right,
it's very easy to just allow this man to kind of run amok and just sit back. Um, a lot of your friends, people that you met who might have been apathetic, like why bother? Because it's easy to say why bother, but if it's not directly happening or you think it's going to impact you, and then it does. Um, and then, so the whole, did you learn this in school, the famous Holocaust? First they came for me, first they came for, you know, the politicians, and they came for, and then eventually they came for
Trade
me.
trade union
Right.
workers, they came for Jews, yeah. And eventually there's nobody left. And so that's why I think it's really important just to stand up and to push back in any way that we can. And actually, um, in the last week or so, we've seen a whole lot of effective pushback, and it worked because we saw we saw his so-called anti-weaponization fund to basically pay off insurrectionists. That's been, that's dead in the water now, essentially.
Right.
And then we've seen his name taken off the Kennedy Center. We have seen uh, we've just seen a lot of ways that people have pushed back, and I think the lesson for all of that is that you just have to keep doing it. And Timothy Schneider, an excellent historian on authoritarianism. If you haven't read him already, Manny, you should. It's called a book called On Tyranny. And one of the first lessons is don't obey in advance. Don't get most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given to governments because people think ahead and they think, well, if I give this, then they'll leave me alone or they'll let me be. And that's not how it works. They'll always come back for more. They will always want to take more and more until they have everything. And so I really, appreciate everything you're doing. And is there a way to keep this going when you graduate in a couple of weeks?
So what's next
Of
for you?
course.
Yeah, what's next?
So I know you guys are probably going to laugh at me about this, but of course, back in freshman year, I was planning on enlisting in the military. But of course, throughout the years, I've seen how this administration has changed. And then my mom kept telling me, "Are you still going to enlist?" And then I decided to ultimately change that course. And now I'm going to do EMT, but still continue with my activism as well. Because I remember I told my mom, why would I wear a uniform that doesn't even care about me? Because the fact how because the position that they also wanted to place me from 68 Whiskies, which is combat medic, to 11 Bravo, which is infantry, I basically told my mom, why would I serve a country that doesn't even care about me? The fact how,
You are serving your country. You're
You are
serving your
serving,
country.
yes. We were
You're
going to see
serving
your,
your country right now by issuing, doing your First Amendment
your
and organizing.
yeah,
right,
there are more ways.
Service.
Yeah, there are more ways to be of service.
of course.
The
And
civil
then
rights movement is, domestic service. So,
right,
and a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yes, that's probably one of the biggest forms of domestic service. So that
right,
as well. So you
And I
are,
would and I would say your country cares about you, your government does not.
yeah.
right.
That'll say that.
Because like what Kennedy said is, don't ask what this country can do for you, but ask what you can do for this country.
Absolutely. So,
Mhm.
And not to mention, I remember having a conversation with my dad where he said, and I remember this vaguely because of course this currently happened, how they basically a rat no, there was a snake in the grass and the rat reported it to everyone and no one cared about it. The cow didn't care about it, the dog didn't care about it, but then the snake bit the farmer's wife and then the farmer got sick. And then the farmer's wife got sick and then the farmer had to sell the dog and had to kill the cow in order to sell the meat. No one cares now, but watch until it happens to you. Because
yeah.
of course, this is going to happen to everyone. People said that they were only going to get the immigrants, but of course, American citizens are also being murdered in cold blood.
Well, yes, but at first you're like, oh, we're only going to go after criminals.
Right.
And then, Pam Bondi was like, well, if you came over here illegally, then you're a criminal. So what they did was they changed the name and the nature and to justify what they were doing.
Yep.
And people were not criminals. They were seeking asylum, they were going through the process. So they changed the language. And as long as people are like, oh, is that what it is? No, it's not. That's wrong, Pam Bondi. So people are not criminals for trying to come here and, that to, for what they're doing, like in Delaney Hall. I was
Right,
just reading like the Geo Group who's running Delaney Hall. A lot of the admin in the Geo Group were former ICE agents. So,
right.
this whole prison system is a moneymaker for a lot of people. And it- there's other ways that this country could make money, than
Right, of course.
detaining a lot of its people. So,
And then
uh,
what else was I gonna say?
And
and
what's
then,
next? Well,
oh
what's
wait, so yeah, you
yeah,
didn't
what,
finish. So what's
yeah,
next? So
what's next for you? Where are you going to college? How are you going to continue all this when
So like I said,
you
I'm planning on doing EMT at Staten Island Emergency Medical Training Center to basically get my EMT certification and apply for the FDNY. But of course, I still want to continue my activism here in Staten Island. So I'll still be around the community, helping out in any form of way. And luckily for the answer that you said about the Portsmouth High School account, I was basically able to find an elected lower classman, basically run them the steps, have them basically become my intern, and then learn how to organize, learn how to make posters, learn how to work with social media. And luckily, I was able to pass down the torch to her.
excellent.
So hopefully next year we'll have another protest on ice, or
well, hopefully there won't
any
be
of
any need to. Hopefully there
Yeah,
won't be any need to.
hopefully,
Hopefully
right.
there'll be enough pushback
but there's
where that won't be
But there's more
necessary.
things to worry about. So
but
like I told,
you've taught the
so
skills to keep it going if necessary. So and
Absolutely. And I think communication just about ICE and about what they're doing, whether, they are doing a Minneapolis reign of terror or not, I think is really important.
right,
and
and
also you could always be a line of communication with the next generation from Poor Richmond and help them connect. One of the things that I learned as a being young as an activist is that you do need to learn, certain organizational things and how to get a permit, the ABCs of, how to run a rally, the use of marshals, marshals are
right,
important, um, and in essence of you have to learn to patrol yourselves because you patrol yourselves, there's no need for the NYPD and, the outside forces to come in.
of
So,
course, yeah.
so the
So luckily, everything that I learned from high school, I'm implementing them within my activism as well. And luckily, I was able to teach her that. She's a very good friend of mine, of course. I'm gonna make sure that she does everything right, making sure that she also make sure that she has someone to talk about this or to ask help because of course it's not easy running this type of things, but of course you're always going to have support, which is something that I tell her. And regardless of ICE being here in the island or not, I keep telling her that the job is never done because of course there's going to be always another topic, there's going to be another problem, there's going to be another issue, and you are going to talk about it.
good. That's good. And you're going
Right,
to be an EMT and so you'll be part of the FDNY, which would be great. And the commissioner for the FDNY is a EMT, so that's new. And you get the great NYC pension. So
yes.
something that is, a blessed thing that we have. I mean, I'm able to retire, and I retired young. So, and I'm able to do other things because of that pension. So
Right,
now you're gonna be part of a union. So good for
of
you.
course.
Yeah.
Thank
Well, thank you. Thank you, Manny Torres, for being on the podcast. It was a really good conversation.
Any last minute things you want to say to get out or
So basically, the one thing I would probably say, and regardless of those that are listening, if you have something, make sure to let it be loud rather than quiet because it always echoes. That's one thing I'll say.
very
Okay,
good.
very good. Well, this is the Left in the Forgotten World podcast. I'm Andrew Savage.
And I'm Nancy Richards, and we want to thank Manny Torres from Porchman High School who came here to talk with us today. Keep the activism up.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.